Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see that so many of you have shown up for this event on fine reporting. My name is Christopher, and I'm a project advisor at the North Sea Region program. And the webinar today will focus on the final report. And in order to deliver this, I have my colleague Jesper with me today. Jesper, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Christopher, and hello to all of you. My name is Jesper Jönsson, and I'm also a project advisor here at the Joint Secretariat of the North Sea Region program. And today, as Christopher said, we will be covering two subjects. Obviously, the first one is about the final reporting, and this session will be handled by myself and my esteemed colleague, Christopher Wilson. And later on today, the second webinar is scheduled later today between 1 and 2, and it is about the final adjustment change. And this will be handled by our distinguished colleague, Annemieke Feikens. And each webinar will last approximately for 1 hour.
Okay, thank you, Jesper. I'm just focusing also on the chat because I can see that some is having troubles with hearing us, but I can see that some of our colleagues have responded to it, so that's perfect. Okay, but Jesper, it's also important to mention that it's not only the two of us as capacities that are present here today. We also have a number of our national contact points. The national contact points that they can, as you all know, assist you on any issues or question that arises with a national character. And you can, if you haven't found their contact details already, you can find them on our website. Please go to the menu item about the program, and then you will be able to see where they're from and who they are and how you can reach them. And before we get, or perhaps it's also relevant to mention that if you are a Danish beneficiary, as you might be aware of, we do not have a Danish national contact point. So in that case, you may contact the Secretariat for advice. Now to some practical information. The tool we're using today is Click Meeting. And during the webinar, it will only be Jesper and I who will have our cameras on, and it will only be us who will have the microphones on. If you have any questions, hopefully you will have questions, then please put them in the chat box. And I'm trying to point now, and Jesper, I'm pointing in the right direction. Perfect. In the lower right corner of the picture, you will see the chat function. If you have a question, please remember to put a question mark after it, because then the system will recognize that it's actually a question. And then when we are done with our interventions, then we will move to a Q&A session where we'll pick up on all of the questions that you have posted, and then we will answer all of them. It's also perhaps important to let you know that if you miss out on any of our good advices that we provide during this webinar, then it will be recorded and it will be posted on our website after we are done today. So for the agenda of the webinar, then welcome and introduction already taken care of, that we can strike that. Then we will go to the timeline for final reporting. We will talk about final reporting versus final reporting, including the last progress report. We will look at the content of the final report. We will also support you with a checklist for final reporting, so it will be easier for you to remember and structure the work linked to this. We will touch upon the topic of eligibility of expenditure links to also closing down your project. And then we will talk about the retention period and audit trail. And as I said, we will wrap this all up with a Q&A session. Jesper, please tell us more about the final reporting, and I'll put your presentation on.
Thank you, Christopher. During the next 25 minutes, we will be covering the following 6 issues. We will cover the timeline for final reporting. When should we as a project submit our final report, and how much time do we have as a partnership to finalize the final report? We will also touch upon the distinguish between the final report versus the last progress report. What should we as a project consider once we are closing in on submitting a final last progress report versus the final report? Of course, we will look upon the actual content of the final progress report. What constitutes the final report, and what are the main components? And also, more importantly, what kind of information do we as the Joint Secretariat expect to see in each section? Here we will provide you with further guidance. On the documentation issue, we will also look at and consider how should we as a partnership document the material, and what should we think about in this regard. When it comes to the finance report, what are the main points to consider for the finance report? And finally, as Christopher said, we will also provide you with a checklist for you to remember all relevant information to be submitted with the final report. During the intervention, there will also be a key summary after covering some key aspects and content relation information before going to the next issue. There will also be 2 polls where we will ask you to reflect on some of the aspects that we have given, and this way we will make it a bit more interactive. So let's turn to the main business about the final report. It is the same business in terms of it is still one aggregated report that you submit to us, the Joint Secretariat, for the activities. And yes, there are still individual reports to be filled in by the beneficiaries. And yes, it is the same business in terms of finances, as it is the same reporting style and approach in the OMS. So there are no surprises there. However, there are some key aspects that are actually different that you ought to consider when it comes to the business as usual point. The timeline is covering the entire lifetime of the project. It is focusing also on the overall achievement and the impact based on your collective effort. That is the transnational level of your activities. And the final report is also considering the last 6 months of implementation. And this is normally reflected in the work package description, which we will give you later on. So when it comes to the timeline for final reporting, as you all know, there is an end date provided in your subsidy contract. The main rule here is that no later than 3 months after project closure, you need to submit your final report. So the example is the latest end date within our project portfolio is the 30th of June 2023 for project closing down all their activities. So that means you have 3 months to submit your report. That means by the end of September, we want to have your final report. What should we consider as a project once we are closing in on submitting a final report versus the last progress report? The main point or the important point here to consider is it is also taking into account the last months of implementation from your previous reporting round. So in practice, this means that your final report may cover 3, 4, 5, 6, or even more months to cover. So that is the number of months you have had in order to finalize all your activities. So what are the deciding factors for potentially skipping one last normal progress report prior making your final report? Well, it is a judgment call, as we say in the Secretariat, and it's based on each project's unique character, progress, and status. And normally we say there are 4 main factors to consider, depending on where you are in terms of the spending level of your finances, of course, but also depending on the actual progress of activities in relation to earlier reports. It is also depending on your status in relation to where you are with your current major and minor changes. And fourth and finally, it is also depending on your timing of your submission of your final report in relation to the points above that we just addressed. So therefore, our key message to you is that you stay in touch with your project advisor in order to make the final decision on how to proceed. So to sum up, so far we have discussed on the main business of the final report, the timeline for final reporting, and what you have to do once closing in submitting your last progress report versus the final report. So the 3 top things to remember is it is the same kind of business for handling the final report. You do have 3 months after project closure to finalize your project. And as said, you should always stay in touch with your project advisor, deciding upon to what extent your last progress report is needed prior it is time for you to submit your final report. That said, now we are coming into the first poll. And as you can see, there are 2 questions that we would like you to consider. The first question is about the submission of your final report. Is it correct that it is 6 months after project closure you need to submit your final report? Yes or no? And the second question is about, can I skip the final progress prior the final report? The answer is either yes, as long as I have an agreement with my project advisor. No, why would I want to? So please fill in your question replies.
Thank you, Jesper. And I can see that so far around 50% of our participants have answered the questions. So let's just give it a few more seconds and see how many will actually complete this small poll. Okay, in 5, 4, 3, 2, the last ones, 1, and let's end it here. Okay, I'm going to share the results with you, Jesper.
Thank you. That is correct. The submission of your final report is not 6 months after project closure. It is indeed 3 months. And about skipping the potential last progress report before submitting your final report, the correct answer is yes, as long as I have an agreement with my project advisor. So we have now come to the second part of our presentation, and this is the crucial part, and it's about the content of the final progress report. There are 12 sections all in all to be considered for you as a partnership for the entire final report. The good thing is that you recognize the different categories as well as the subcategories, as they are very similar to the full progress report. And as said previously, there are a couple of differences. Yes, the timeline is now covering the entire lifetime of the project. And yes, it is focusing on all overall achievement and impact based on your collective effort, that is the transnational level of activities. And yes, as said previously, the final report is also considering the last months of implementation. And this is again normally reflected in the work package description. As always, the perspective, or if you like, the focus, is now only on the project level report. That is the aggregated final report that is coordinated by the lead beneficiary and which is also submitted to the Joint Secretariat for the final monitoring and evaluation. What we will do now is to guide you through each section of the final report. And here we will also highlight the main information that we want to see in each section. In terms of the first one, highlights of main achievements during the lifetime of the project, this is undoubtedly the main and the most important section of the final report. Because here we want to see how you, as a transnational partnership, convey what you have successfully implemented during your project. Of course, on project level, as said. And it should be in the style of a press release, as interesting, concise, and easy to read as possible. So please state your aim of the project and highlight your outputs and results, any awards received of any kind, communication highlights, investments, and most importantly, any spin-offs that you have had, that is potential impact on any specific target group or sector. Tell us the story, because this is the most crucial part, and as this will be copied into the project web space, and also this will be read by all relevant stakeholders in terms of the monitoring committee, steering committee, national contact points, even the representatives from the commission. So please take time and do it with utmost care and respect once filling in this. The final level of achievement when it comes to the project objectives, here you should just think of two main things. Before actually describing the actual content, you always have to indicate the level of final achievement. And as you know, there is a drop box with the options fully achieved, to a large degree, to a minor degree, and not achieved. And then there is the explanation box. And it's simple. Here you provide us with a view on how your project managed to fulfill or not, and give a justification to the different project objectives which you set out at the application stage. Now we are coming to the two main things about the output and the result indicators. When submitting the information on the outputs, you must make sure that the information behind each output target is substantiated and there is no double counting has taken place. And again, you need to explain any over or underachievement of your project targets. So that is why it is so important that you have a cumulative lists where you indicate and also substantiate the achievement of your 5 output targets. And this can, of course, be attached in the annex section or attached directly to one of the outputs in the table. And as you know, we have also provided a template for this spreadsheet that you could use for this exercise. But the form itself is not so important to us, but the information contained with it, that is what counts. Because the key message here is that it's extremely important that you, as a project, are able to show the final achievement of all outputs, because this helps us, our program, to ensure the validity of the data you provide us. And since these figures are also presented in the North Sea Region's program's final report towards the European Commission, it is therefore essential and vital that we have the sufficient backup data and information should there be an audit either on the program or on the project level. In terms of the result indicators, as well as about the output indicators, it is the similar procedure. Just like before, you have to indicate the level of achievement, overachieved, achieved, or underachieved. And then again, you need to fill in the number in the column achieved since last report. And then, of course, you also have to be able to give us an explanation and with the attachments for the output and the the result indicators. For the result indicators as well, we also have a fact sheet number 23, and here you will find a description on the program indicators. And of course, depending on which priority and specific output indicator you applied under, you need to find the correct result indicator information. And here, once you have done so, you also need to give an account for how your results are matching the description given in the fact sheet. Finally, we have the final level achievement of work packages. And here you submit the detailed level of activities broken down on each work package. And again, just as in previous section, you identify the level of work package status: completed and achieved as planned, completed and achieved more than planned, or completed and achieved less than planned. And again, there is a descriptive column, and here it is important for you to consider that you make a full account for the progress over the entire lifetime of the project. And also, in the case if you do not achieve all your deliverable or targets or activities, again, you need to explain why you were not able to do this. And this will be most likely relevant for projects that are affected severely by the current COVID-19. This is just a kind reminder about the indicators that we have published and guidance, and here you can find the PDF document for further reading. So to sum up part 2, so far we have focused on the highlights of the main achievements, the objectives, and the indicators. So the two main aspects that we want you to remember is tell your impressive and successful story when it comes to the highlights. And please do follow the guidance note on the indicators. That said, we're going to the poll number 2.
I am pulling that up now, Jesper.
So the questions we are having: do we need to provide the data that backs up the output targets? Yes. Or is it no? And the second question is about the highlights of the main achievements. Is it important because all relevant stakeholder reads it, or is it relevant because only the Joint Secretariat reads it?
We already got a lot of responses, Jesper, but I'm thinking that we just give it again a few more seconds to collect all of the wise answers. Do you think we should close it here, Jesper?
Indeed, indeed.
I'll do that. We'll end the voting now and share the results.
Thank you. So do we need to provide the data that backs up the outputs? Yes, that is correct. And the second question, yes, it is because all relevant stakeholder reads it. That is indeed correct. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming closer and closer towards the end. But before that, there are a few more things to consider. The final 5 items that you see on the screen, you also recognize from the full progress report. And this is the part of the final report which is more descriptive, if you like. So, on the transnationality aspect, you need to summarize how your partnership worked together in order to achieve the project objectives and results. And again, a good baseline is to look what you described in your application and also in your earlier full progress reports. This way, it is easier for you to find the necessary highlights. On communication and publicity, here you should provide an overview of the overall achievements on communication during the entire lifetime of the project. So please make sure to give some good examples on publicity. Also, if you were awarded any awards, either on local, regional, national, or even European level, are very interesting for us. And there is also a section addressing to what extent you are in compliance with formal publicity requirements. And this is just a tick box, yes or no, where you indicate to what extent you have been using a billboard or an explanatory plaque, for example. The third item, the knowledge transfer, you simply summarize how your partnership work together with ongoing Interreg or any other European projects from other funding sources. Again, a good baseline is to consider what you described in the application and in previous reports. You also need to respond towards the challenges of the EU 2020 policies, especially in relation to smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth, as these were at the heart of policy intervention during your application stage. And of course, similar counts for the horizontal principles of the program when it comes to sustainable development, equal opportunities, and so on. On investments, you summarize how your partnership implemented the investments, if you have had any. And of course, here you should also give an account on the transnational benefits. The fourth and final point on capitalization. Our program is here looking for what kind of impacts your outputs and results will actually have. We are interested here to see about your different solutions and approaches and how they are being further developed, tested, and or promoted by the project, its partnership, and potential end users. We are also interested to find out to what extent further cooperation will continue after the closure of the project. And as another step for the North Sea Region program to demonstrate the impacts of all our 73 projects, we are also preparing some new, interesting, and exciting features for our work on capitalization. During project closure, you will be invited to write a blog article, as well as having the opportunity to come in with a video testimonial. And more information about this will be further introduced during our webinar on communication entitled Saying It Loud, Put Your Project in the Spotlight. And this webinar will be broadcasted on the 25th of June between 10 and 11 by our dear colleagues Sophie Forfang and Lise Espersen. About the annexes, it's very straightforward. What we want to see here is simply the evidence on what you have achieved. And here you can see a few examples of what we are looking for. So, two aspects left, the final finance report and then the promise checklist. And the final report on finance, it is the same as the as in previous reports, so no surprises there. Again, what you just need to remember is, of course, to have a statement of expenditure that must accompany the final progress report. And of course, all cost also needs to be declared by all beneficiaries, being subject to the first level control, which is, of course, compulsory. And from our end, the budget will, of course, be checked for overspendings, both at beneficiary and project level. And any overspendings will, of course, be deducted from the final payment. So, to sum up, we have focused mainly on the descriptive and qualitative parts of the final report. Again, a starting good point is to make use of the full application and each full progress report in order for you to have a baseline. And this especially when it comes to transnationality, knowledge transfer, and investments. Did you receive any publicity awards? Tell us. Bring us some of the good stories on impact for the capitalization section. And for the finance report, yes, it is the same business as usual. We have now come to the end, And we promised in the beginning to provide you with a short checklist in order for you to give you some final advice for how to pursue the final report. Sometimes you do remember there are some steering committee decisions that you need to endorse and adhere to. In some cases, you need to cooperate with some ongoing Interreg projects, or you simply have to follow up on some EU policy that is linked to your activities. Therefore, you should consider these in the final report or put it in a document which you upload in the annexes. Again, make sure to follow the guidance note on indicators. Make sure to update and review your project web space and output library. Again, please make sure to have all your logos correct. And make sure to consider the changes prior to the final report and also in relation to the final adjustment change, which we will talk about later on, as said. And finally, you have only 3 months to finalize and submit your final report. Good luck with your submission of your final report. Thank you. And the questions, we do take them in the end, as said. And now I hand over to Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesper. I'll just change the presentation. And here we have it. The nice topic of administrative topics relevant for closing projects. Don't be alarmed. This will be a walk in the park. It's just reminding you about some of the crucial aspects that you, of course, already know because you are into the material of our program rules. So there's nothing new on that front. And as Jesper said, the finance report, it's the same procedure, it's the same approach that you have been used to from the regular progress reports. What I will just pay your attention to is briefly talk about eligibility of expenditures. So not what is eligible, because we already know that. You already know that because you have been implementing a project. You know what can be supported by our program and what cannot. Briefly touch upon the retention period of documentation and then audits after project closure. So when we talk about expenditures, which expenditures are eligible, we're not talking about necessarily about cost categories, but perhaps we can talk about cost categories in context of final reporting versus, regular project implementation. There's 3 items that I have listed here, and that is cutoff dates, cost categories, and audit trails. All 3 things is something that is already covered in the fact sheet, but this is again to remind you of how this is connected and interlinked. When we talk about cutoff dates, it's important to remember, and if we want to put it roughly, we're talking about 2 periods here. So we talk about the implementation period of your project. That is what I've tried to indicate on this illustration. The implementation period is defined in your application form as the start and the end date of the project. That is defined the implementation period. And then the closure, that is the 3 months that Jesper referred to in his presentation. The idea behind the closure period of the 3 months is simply to give you time to prepare and submit the final report. So simply drawing up what have you achieved with your project. The cost categories associated with drawing up the final report. So that is the eligible expenditures after the end date of implementation, ordinary implementation. These cost categories can, for example, be first level control. It can be staff costs. So you as project manager of the project, you need to make draw up all of the reports. It could also be external expertise. Perhaps some of you have outsourced the project management. and perhaps it's the external consultants who is also drawing up the project. And of course, there could be other costs, but most importantly, the eligible cost and the associated cost categories for the final report. And remember, we're not talking about the final progress report. We are talking about the final report, so the 3 months after the project closure. These are the only costs that are eligible is by default cost that is associated with drawing up the final report. So the question is, of course, paid versus invoice, what is valid, what is not. And the same goes for, so when all costs that is relevant for the implementation of your project. The cornerstone here is that you need to have them invoiced before the end of the eligibility period for implementing your project. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to have them paid, but it's very important in order for the cost to be considered eligible for implementing your project that is invoiced within the implementation period. And the same goes for the final report. So the 3 months drawing up the final report. Only costs that is either paid or invoiced within these 3 months can be included in the report that you submit to us as the final report. This is, of course, also important when we talk about the audit trail, because remember that all costs that you submit to us has to be backed up by a clear and transparent audit trail, which can be easily recognizable to any auditor that might choose to audit your project after its completion. Retention period. Retention, it sounds like a big fancy word. It's actually just pinning down that you need to save the documentation, all documentation that is proving that you have actually implementing a well-driven project that has made some changes to the North Sea region. And be aware here that there are some small modifications in terms of what is the relevant eligibility period for you. As I put on this slide, then you need to save the documentation from 31st of December of the year in which the final payment was made to the project. The key word here is that we are talking about the project. So if you as a beneficiary have received your final payment, let's say 1 year ahead of the project actually closing, because then you have settled everything with the rest of the project consortia, you still need to adhere to this specific date. If you are in a member state or beneficiary located in an EU member state, then you have to save this documentation for at least 5 years. If you are located in Norway, you have to save the documentation 10 years. And remember, again, we're talking about 31st of December in the year in which the project received the final payment. The two amounts of years that I have posted here is relevant for beneficiaries that is not participating under a state aid scheme. If that is the case, then there's a small modification saying that disregarding where you're located, if you are under a de minimis or GBER scheme, then you have to save the documentation for 10 years. Why saving the documentation, you might ask? For obvious reasons, right? As I pointed out earlier, you need to be able to prove that you have actually implemented the project and all of the funding that you have received from our program is eligible. And especially if you are chosen or selected for an audit after the project closure, it's very important that you have a clear and concise structure and how you save the documentation and how you potentially will make it available after project closure. And perhaps it's also important here to point out a member of staff in your organization that will be the point of reference should you be chosen for control after completion. Examples of controls could be second level control. that is the national level in your member state that performs audits once a year on a sampled amount of project beneficiaries. It could also be what we refer to as third level control. That would be the Commission actually paying a visit to some of our current or former projects. It could also be a national initiative for some reason that your national authorities decides to say, okay, let's have a critical look at a proportion of the beneficiaries from our area of interest that has been funded by via EIDF funding or Norwegian funding in context of the North Sea Region program. So remember to save them. It's nothing out of the ordinary. This is something that is familiar to all of us. That, of course, we need to save all of the receipts, invoices, whatsoever. So what happens if you're subject to an audit after the project has closed and amounts are found to be ineligible? What will happen simply is that the program will issue a recovery note asking you to pay back the wrongfully paid out amount of funding. And then last but not least, and remember this is not covering all of our fact sheets, but all of the topics that I have addressed in this very short presentation covers fact sheet number 1. So that is the general rules on eligibility. It covers fact sheet number 12, documentation and the audit trail. It's a very reader-friendly fact sheet. It's covering, in terms of retention period, it's covering fact sheet number 16 on state aid. And then, of course, it's also covering fact sheet number 21, which is handling final reporting. That being said, Jesper, I think we are ready to answer some questions. And I can see that Jesper is coming back online. Hi, Jesper.
Oh, hi,
so
Christopher.
what I will do now is that I will post the questions one by one in the order that we have received them. When you logged into the Interreg meeting, you saw that there was already 4 questions posted, and that is taken from the registration form. So that is the first 4 questions that we are going to answer. Please feel free to post any questions you might still have, or if some of our answers make you question something, please also let us know. So let's go to it, Jesper.
Yes, Christopher.
Yes. So the first one, the first questions that we have received is reading. We are hoping to extend our project end date to 31st December 2020. If we have partners who will be finished their activities before that date, will they be able to start working on the final report before this date? Also, does the FLC has to verify the final adjustment change? Jesper, please put a few words on this.
Thank you, Christopher. For the first aspects, extending your project end until the 31st of December 2020 should, of course, be no problem. Please be in touch with your project advisor and communicate on how and why the reasons are you need to do this. When it comes to the second issue about being able to start working on the final report before this end date, the system and the OMS is drilled that way that they just have to wait until the final report has been released by the project advisor, and then they have to, then they will be able to work on the final report. And for the final and third question, does the FLC has to verify the final adjustment change? The answer is no, because here the final adjustment change, which we will have a session on later on, that is a change that is made, and then of course once the change has been approved and been submitted via the final report, only then the FLC needs to step in and verify. Christopher?
Thank you, Jesper. I think that was very clear and concise. So let's move on to the next question. Until when can cost be claimed for the project? And we already covered eligibility periods, when are which costs eligible, thinking again of implementation period and drawing up the project in this last 3 months. So what I think we are going to answer here, when cost can be claimed, we're not talking about eligibility periods. Cost can be claimed until you submit the final report, as long as they are correctly adhering to the rules for the 2 periods that we have been discussing. I hope that answers the question, that disregarding when the cost has occurred, have it been paid or invoiced within the correct period, then cost can be claimed until the very end. So let's take the next one. Publish. Great. So the staff cost and the non-staff cost will probably not exactly match with the amounts in the financial plan. Is it a problem if the financial report, if in the financial report a lower amount of non-staff cost is compensated by a higher amount of staff costs? Of course, we're just talking about reality here, that we make a plan, and to the best of our intentions, the plan might not stick when it hits reality. And of course, there will be some deviations. Our advice here is that you will apply the final adjustment change, which our colleague Anmika will go through in the second webinar of today. And in that one, you can adjust the project budget accordingly, so that everything is more or less cleared before you submit the report to us. Jesper, anything I forgot on this one?
No, Christopher, you covered it all.
Ah, perfect, Jesper. You're so kind.
You're welcome.
So the next question: how long will the project information be kept available on the program website after the official project closure? So let me answer that question first. The information will be kept available on our website at least 5 years after the project has closed. Remember, it's not, we of course have some responsibilities in terms of also following the relevant regulations in terms of for how long do we need to keep information available. It's not to be confused with the retention period for your internal bookkeeping and keeping track of demonstrating what you have implemented in your project. But for all of the information that is available on our website related to projects, a minimum of 5 years after the closure, it will be available. Then the second question, second level control check. Within which time period can the project be selected for second level control check? And will the check be done on project level or for individual beneficiaries? It's hard to give you a precise time frame for when your project can be selected for second level control. The reason is that we pile together a full year of payments to projects, and then we have the audit authority, the program audit authority, who will draw up a sample of projects and beneficiaries, and then base the audits on the small sample. As a point of departure, you can expect that you can be relevant or subject to second level controls a year after, more or less a year after you have received your final payment. And as I tried to indicate, at least in my earlier intervention, then second level control is carried out on individual beneficiaries. So not the entire project consortium will be subject to second level control, at least not as a starting point. Then the next one, Jesper, that's an easy one. Will the webinar be recorded and published on the website in the next days?
Yes, it will, as we already indicated in the introduction.
Thank you, Jesper. Section main achievements has very limited number of characters as each periodic report. But here we need to cover the whole project. Can you perhaps allow a longer text? Jesper.
Yes, thank you, Christopher. Yes, Bronya, we can indeed allow for a longer text. That said, yes, there is still a limited characters in the OMS, but of course in the appendix you can of course upload a longer summary if you would like to.
Thank you so much, Jesper. Moving on to the next one. Is it true that overachieving the results or the output indicators also need a good explanation as underachieving? Jesper?
Yes, yes, this is equally important or even more important to explain and to justify because that will also address the European Commission's view on indicators and also allow us as a program to help explaining why projects are indeed overachieving, and this will also ease the process and the bridging towards the new program. So yes, it is indeed very important that you give us a sufficient explanation and justification when it also comes to over and underachieving on indicators.
Thank you so much, Jesper. Let's take this one. How do we sign up for the Saying It Loud webinar next week? Well, if you go to our website, I think it's the first or the second news article that you will find. Please go to our main website, and then you can follow the links, and you will be able to sign up. And yeah, that shouldn't cause a lot of troubles to do that. If you have any troubles, please let us know, and we will assist you on it. The next one, how about confidential reports? They don't have to meet the publicity requirements, do they? Question mark. Jesper?
Yes, Christopher. When it comes to confidential reports, of course, you will have the opportunity in the output library to indicate to what extent they should be public or not. But that said, as long as they are co-financed by our program, regardless if they are confidential or not, they still need to meet the publicity requirements.
Thank you, Jesper. Do we need to justify overspending? We briefly touched upon it in my previous answer. Please, as far as possible, make use and apply the final adjustments change. And in general, overspending, yeah, of course, you should provide an explanation for it unless you have already reshuffled your budget, because in that case, then you have argued why you need to realign the budget, and then you don't need to explain the overspending. Let's take the next one. Is the budget topped on budget line or per partner? I guess what we're talking about here is when will we impose deductions? The straight answer to that is that when we assess the final report and also when we are reviewing progress reports, then we are looking at, first of all, the entire project grant, has that been exceeded or not? Second of all, we are looking at beneficiary budgets. So have they been exceeded or not? If we see any overspending on beneficiary total budget or project budget, of course, we will make deductions. If we see, which hopefully is not the case for the final report, because you have had the chance to realign your budget in the final adjustment change. If we, on the other hand, see overspending still occurring on budget line level for individual partners, but they have enough budget still to would have been able to reshuffle, we of course will not, at least at the starting point, impose any deductions. But of course, do we see from one report to the next an overspending of 100,000 euros on one budget line, we might ask some follow-up questions. I think the question from Martijn was answered, hopefully. Otherwise, Martijn, please post a question. In case costs claimed under budget line 4 and 5 are not covered by table C8 and C9 when it comes to the final report, should an FLC reject these also for previous reports? So remember, I don't know why, I just forgot exactly when we're talking about C8 and C9. That is equipment and investments, I think. Otherwise, it's external expertise and services and equipment, either of the two. Disregarding that, of course, you should always pay attention to, as a first level controller, what is listed in the application form. Is it reasonable or not to include the cost? Can it be justified in the context of the application form? But I wouldn't say that it has to match necessarily one-on-one. So saying just because you didn't explicitly mention this contract by name, that I will reject it then. Please, and I know all of our first level controllers acting on behalf of the beneficiaries, they are reasonable people. Please also apply some of your sound reasoning when you are auditing projects. Next one, our projects on 31st of our project ends on 31st of August, but FLC works is in September. Can we claim for this? Chris, you can, and I would like to refer back to my intervention on paid versus invoiced. I know it's a bit out of the ordinary here, but you need your first level controller to invoice you before you submit the claim to us. It's very important. And remember, the cost also, even though it's cost for first level control, it has to be controlled by your first level controller themselves. I hope that answers the question.
It does, Christopher.
Thank you, Jesper. You can, of course, start preparing your final report outside of the OMS already. That's a really good intervention from one of our participants that would like to share this with the rest of the participants. Thank you for that. And then ask your advisor which question you will have to answer in the final report, and ask partners to start earlier. Again, a good advice to start preparing and at least mentally prepare that you will have this endeavor in the horizon. Okay, then we follow up again. No, it was not completely clear to me. May I ask again? Yes, you may. Of course, that's what we're here for. The first level controller has to approve all costs spent claimed, and this happens when the final financial report is closed. So the FLC also approved costs claimed during the 3 months after the project end, which occurred due to the closure. Jesper, if I'm mistaken on this, please correct me afterwards. Again, you have to have all costs at least invoiced before you can claim them to us. If the cost relates to the implementation period, we have to consider that it has been invoiced within or before the official end date of your project. If it has so, of course, you can include it also in the final report if you only apply a final report and not the setup that Jesper also mentioned, the final report directly linked to a progress report. If for some reason your first level controller, I don't know why, but is not able to invoice you for their services linked to the final report, meaning that they cannot invoice you within the 3 months before you submit the report to us, I have to tell you that then of course you have missed the chance you had to get the funds or the cost reimbursed, because as you are aware of, the final report is the final report for claiming costs to the program.
Yes, Christopher, that is entirely correct. And this just underlines what you just said. Again, to have a really good communication between the lead beneficiary and with your FLC.
Thank you. We use a fixed percentage approach to account for staff time on the project. How do we record time spent on working on the final report in the closure period? Do we need to revise employment letters to the end of the project closure? Annabelle, that would be a really good idea, that at least you have an internal memo saying that we apply the same setup working with a fixed percentage of the staff cost for X amount of employees during the drawing up the final report, and that you just can say that this extends to the final report or drawing up the final report, as I said. So yeah, please go ahead applying the same procedure. And also I think that actually answers the question.
It does.
And I think that that actually covers all of the questions that was posted. Are there any questions you still have you would like to post but haven't done it so far? Please write them now and put a question mark at the end. Otherwise, we are closing the webinar. Thank you so much for all of your kind words. Let's see. There's one final question. Are cost hours that were made by the financial controller during the 3 months after project closure also eligible, like the FOC cost? First of all, it cannot be. No, sorry, I misread this one. Of course, internal cost for drawing up the final report is considered an eligible cost. So if you have any internal accounting and costs associated with that, of course, these costs are also considered eligible. I think this is where we're going to end the webinar for today. It has been a pleasure having all of you, and it's really nice to see all of the interaction, despite the fact that you can see us, we cannot see you. So it's really helpful to have all of the chats going. It's nice to see how we can help each other, despite the fact that we cannot see each other. And it's nice to see that all of you as participants can guide and put up good advices. Networking in a virtual environment. Thumbs up to that. Jesper and I are going to thank you now. Please, when I end the webinar, do not close the browser window. You'll be transferred to a survey. Of course, after all of our events, we have a small survey so that we can collect all of your feedbacks and improve what we're doing. So this is your chance to be very honest. So thank you so much. It's good to see you, and see you again at 1 for the final adjustment change webinar. Bye.
Bye.